ladies and gentlemen. Great to see you here today. My name's Ashleigh. I'm the Chief Executive of KJR. It's great to be back at the MCA. It's wonderful to be part of the Vivid Ideas Exchange again. It's fantastic to see how it's grown over recent years, and we're thrilled to be a part of it. Before we begin official proceedings and our wonderful panel, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It's upon their ancestral lands that the MCA is built. For those of you who don't know anything about KJR, just a brief intro. We're a leading IT consultancy specialising in software quality. We've been operating for about 20 years and have offices throughout Australia, servicing ASX listed and Fortune 500 companies and government departments at federal and state level. If you are that way inclined, socially, digitally and so on, if you'd like to post or tweet anything, then there's the appropriate Twitter handle and hashtag there for your reference and utilisation. I'm now going to hand over to KJR's founder and chairman, Dr. Kelvin Ross. He'll be facilitating the panel of experts in their erudite and articulate nature. Today we'll be discussing how corporates can benefit from a little startup Kool-Aid, and also a conversation that doesn't get thrown out into the digital ecosystem much these days, but also how startups could apply a little bit of scaled up thinking at times. Please welcome Kelvin Ross.
Good afternoon. Wonderful afternoon in a great location and outlook. I won't spend too long talking, just a brief introduction into today's topic. Thank you all for coming. Today, what we're really discussing is, as you can see in the theme, quality, velocity and resilience. So I've had the pleasure of working across both large enterprise organisations and as well in my own small startups. And one of the key things there is that how we address risk, how we roll out applications, how we innovate, and how can we do that with speed yet maintain quality and protect the organisation from some of the crocodiles that are out there as we roll out digital technology. So to help us discuss that theme, we've assembled a stellar crew up the front here that bridge a lot of experiences predominantly in the digital space and bridging both startups as well as large enterprises. And without me introducing them individually, I'm going to hand over for them for a brief introduction. So John, we might start off with you at the far end.
Thanks, Cal. My name is John Butterworth. I'm a partner in a digital strategy company called Orchestrate. I joined the digital industry in 1996 and spent a number of years being the classic disruptor in news, weather, sports, porn, anything you can possibly imagine. I'm probably best known to this cast of characters as the CEO of the Digital Industry Association, AMIA. And about 5 years ago, AMIA really started to change because the number of enterprises that started to come into the network, really wanting to understand more about how they could implement digital sort of throughout their entire organisations. I'm now partner in a strategy company where we exclusively deal with the enterprise side of digital.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dale Cohen. I'm the General Manager for BizTech Enterprise Solutions here in New South Wales. Formerly, I worked at Telstra where I ran BigPond.com. I was also formerly a board member of AMIA. I was a founding staff member at 9MSN, and for those who remember far enough back, I was a staff member at a little business called CompuServe, which is pre-internet. So we bought the first actually it was slip dial-up internet connections into Australia.
So my name's Mark Dando, and I'm a consultant in the sort of digital industry, helping big business work with startups to do some kind of incredible things. Before I've been doing that consultancy, I was head of online and mobile at the ABC, head of mobile strategy for Fairfax, and going back far enough, you can probably tell in my voice I'm from the UK. I was a consultant to the mobile industry in the UK.
Afternoon, everyone. Adam Bird. Currently at Westpac, digital product owner. I sort of share two hats. So I've had the unusual experience in a large corporate of creating the strategy, working with partners like AWS to actually make it happen, and now I'm in the BAU stance. So you don't usually get that sort of experience in a large corporate. You usually get told to just write the strategy in isolation, or you're on delivery. So prior to that, I was in sales director at an agency here in Sydney. And before that, I spent 8-9 years at IBM, traveling around Asia Pac as the risk officer for a couple of years.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I'm Ian Gardner. I've got a sort of weird hybrid mix. So I'm also not from these shores. I'm Scottish. I moved here 13 years ago, started my own business because I needed a job. It was a technology startup called Viacorp, so we're sort of corporate video software. I ran that all the way up till mid last year. We did everything startups should do, raised money, almost went bust every couple of months. It felt like hired lots of people, raised quite a lot of money, and I stepped down as CEO. As well as that, I founded Innovation Bay, so I'm a small-time investor, but I certainly see a lot of companies come through, so I'm pretty exposed to that investment climate. And as a result of both of those two jobs, I got a great job with Amazon Web Services, where I am now. So I look after helping the startup community and startups specifically across Australia and New Zealand to be more successful using digital technologies and some of the other commercial skills that I think I can bring to it. So a weird hybrid.
Okay, I'm about to go into our first question, but maybe just a quick show of hands before I start that. Who works predominantly in enterprise environments? So only, yeah. So and who works predominantly in startups? Okay, and some of you are sort of wanting to choose between the two. Okay, so I'll get into our first question. Innovation. I mean, are enterprises looking at how startups innovate, or what are startups looking for to learn from enterprises? So what's the key drivers there? What's each other looking at each other to learn? So Ian, maybe we start with you.
Sure. So I mean, Australia is a strange place for Amazon. It's partly because the startup ecosystem here is not where it is. We are not Silicon Valley. We're not Israel. We never will be. And I'm very much of the view that even though we're not, and we would like to be, let's not whinge about it, but let's just get on and make it better. So when I look around at the startups, sure, they could be better. Sure, there could be more venture capital. And I'm not going to answer this by talking about the lack of funding. I mean, there's a lack of funding, there's a lack of community, there's a lack of government resource, there's a lack of education. There's a whole bunch of things that go into that. We are heavily enterprise weighted, so when we look at the sort of revenue structure for Amazon locally, it is more enterprise than startup, certainly than I'd like it to be. So one of the things I've been doing in the 12 months I've been there is to try and work out how we can almost address that imbalance or take advantage of it. So what can startups do from enterprise? And to be honest, the best thing that startups can get from enterprise is to sell to them. Forget the accelerators, incubators, whatnot. I mean, that'd be nice. I mean, that's the sort of ultimate goal, but become a supplier. That's one of the first things. There's some other trends that we're seeing around that. So if you look at what Telstra's done with Muru-D, I mean, that's probably the standout example for me. I mean, they have invested quite a lot of money in order to invest what is not a lot of money. I think it's about 50 grand an investment to take a small stake, I think 8% in a range of startups. So Telstra is becoming exposed to startups in its own right. And I don't think they're ever going to make a spectacular amount of money from it, but they're using that as a means of cultural change. And I think that's probably one of the key takeaways. And we're seeing that, Westpac's doing the same thing, Macquarie's doing the same thing, AMP's got an investment arm that's investing off balance sheet. So there's definitely there is a osmosis of talent and skill and education that we're seeing, but it's mostly the enterprise trying to become more like startups, because startups are going to be startups however they are, and they want to sell to anyone, they'll give them money. Enterprise need to have a cultural change to become more startup-y.
Yeah. Adam, nothing could be more enterprise than a bank, right? So what's some organisation like a bank trying to learn from startup culture?
I suppose the simple thing is if you talk to pretty much anyone across the bank at the moment, one of the key themes since Brian's come to the helm is Agile. So whether you're talking Agile methodologies, whether you're talking Agile in our approach to spending money, Agile in the way that we actually start an idea and actually roll it out. So in my area in particular, I'm in the digital function. So we're in a slightly unusual spot. We're not in marketing, we're not in IT, we're sort of a business function. I guess you keep hearing this term, shadow IT. So we're sort of able to push the boundaries a little bit differently because we're not bound to the restrictions of the IT controls that are normally applied to an IT team, nor are we sort of whimsical in the sense of the marketing of, what's the next campaign for this quarter, what's the next campaign for the next month. So for us, we're actually leveraging a lot of startup mentality and looking now, so part of the journey that I've just finished, I think we rolled over in March, April, onto Amazon, was to start trying to strip out a lot of the foundational layer that we have to incorporate into a project in order for us to do something. So I'm just going to throw numbers out there, and they're not real numbers, so don't bother about writing these down. But for instance, for us to start up a project of a reasonable sort of nature, we're looking at $100,000 as a startup straight away before we even put pen to paper about the idea. That was just the cost of doing business for us to do something new. And part of what we were doing with leveraging AWS and a couple of other partners was, how do we blow away that sort of foundation at the lower level and make it much cheaper? So getting into that whole mentality for us that it's cheaper for us to fail, therefore you can go fail a few more times, and by failing a few more times you're getting closer to being more successful. That's nothing new, I'm just preaching to the choir here. But for us internally, if you failed and you failed with $100,000 as the baseline, and you probably dropped $500,000, so for instance for that project, you fail, that's $500,000 you're in the hole for. Your next project's now carrying that as almost legacy or equity into the next project. So when you go back up the line and say, I need another $500,000 to go try this, they sort of look at you and you go, well, you're kind of in the hole for $500,000 already. Is this going to turn around $1 million to make us break even? You're like, ugh, I'm not really sure. So part of what we're trying to do here is, I guess, remove, not the bureaucracy, but try and remove that level of that platform, leveraging partners like AWS that make it cheaper for us to go in there and actually try things. So I guess getting into that sort of experimental stage.
Excellent, yeah. We might, Mark, did you want to comment on this?
I want to sort of pick up, on the cultural side of things. Part of what I do is get together a range of big businesses and the leaders, the CIOs from organisations as wide-ranging as Australia Post, Qantas, Commonwealth Bank, get them all in a room together along with some startups and talk about innovation and what it is. And they all keep coming back to, the big businesses all keep coming back to wanting to see cultural change. The startups have a slightly different view, and what we've got down to is, what is the definition of innovation anyway? And there is kind of this sliding scale of what we mean by innovation. To big businesses, traditionally, they've talked about incremental innovation, really. That's what they're talking about, better, faster, cheaper. And what are the roadmaps and product plans we want in place? So everyone's innovated in the past, but the startups are on the other end of that spectrum. They're really looking for something a bit more radical, the disruptive side of that innovation scale. Because, if they're going to embark on, break into an existing industry or business model, they've got to do something quite different. And it's how, like you say, a lot of the big organizations are looking, how do they move in this more agile way? How do they move up that scale? And the sort of place we've got to that is saying, you're going to have a real struggle if you try and change culture in a large organization very, very quickly. Everybody knows that's extremely difficult to do. So we talk a lot about having if you like, a fast-track innovation accelerator in those big businesses, where you can create this kind of co-working space where startups that might be interested in the finance industry come and work in that, say, Commonwealth Bank co-working space, and with the people who really understand that space really well from the bank, and spin up new ideas and start up things within that space.
So from my perspective, and as one of the staff at Telstra who was actually involved in the formation of Murudi, I kind of want to say, in one sense, I've got a pessimistic start to this story about enterprise and innovation, but an optimistic end. And that is that I still hold a fundamental belief that large enterprises cannot at their core innovate. It is actually genetically impossible for that to happen. And the reason is that there are too many factors arrayed in the commercial direction of the organisation, what is important to the day-to-day revenue sources, all of the decision-making processes of that company, to be truly innovative around your core revenue sources. Now, there are ways in which companies can innovate at the edge and spin out new and adjacent products and these things, but to some degree that's not true innovation. That's not kind of going back to the drawing board, starting from scratch and doing it all again. Why did Murudi work at Telstra? And just, Ian was very close to those numbers, but just so that everyone in the room understands, it's 40k investment for 6% of those companies. It actually has nothing to do with Telstra. That's why it worked. my job at the beginning was to hold Telstra back from this incubator and accelerator, and to let Annie Parker and Mick Lubinskas come in and do their thing without even logging into the Telstra email system. They were there really to just go and do their thing, and I was there to answer all of the helpful value-added process questions that a large enterprise comes in and asks, and explain in my very nice Telstraese, this is how you can go away and focus in another direction, because we won't be doing that, thank you very much, and yes, go and speak to the CEO if you have a problem. They're sort of antithetical things, and so what I would say is that the way that you create a successful and agile organisational structure is largely what these guys have just spoken about, but it's about focusing on the agility aspect, and it's about saying how can we actually work better and improve our processes? Who are we competing against? What are the lessons we can take? And to a degree, that's what Murudi teaches the people in Telstra. We get people from within, sorry, I don't work there anymore. They get people from within the organisation to come in and take part. So we get guys from pricing to come in and give people really, really valuable advice on how they should price their products and what they should be. But when they go back to the pricing department, they go, well, you know, maybe I should think a little bit differently about who my customer segments are and how I should do my day job. And those little ideas can percolate and provide inspiration. But did we ever get to a truly agile model where I worked? No. We got to what I would call Wagile. You know, waterfall agile, you sort of get to this point at which you say, well, I still need a cost, a budget, and a defined set of product requirements, which is by definition a waterfall project. But it was about actually saying to all of those helpful processes and people in finance and, you know, legal and all of the processes you have to adhere to as part of a large enterprise, I'm sorry, but you do. This is what we want to do, vertically integrating them, and then with our colleagues in the IT and the delivery system, creating a vertically integrated process where we actually spoke to people. It was a cultural change. It was about going through the organisation, and rather than behaving as a set of silos, saying everybody from our user experience team, and I see a familiar face here today, through to our legal team, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is why we're trying to achieve it, but it's a big change management process, and I would say it's not something you get from a startup, but you can take the idea that you need to have a vertically integrated approach and try and deliver that. So it's pessimism from the sense that I don't think DNA-wise a large corporate can innovate, but what you can do is take ideas in that have some seed of success, go out, incubate them, let them sprout up like flowers, and when they're big enough to be incorporated back in without killing them, that's when you take them in.
And just picking up on that about the not killing them side of things, you know, culture's a bit of a soft term and it gets thrown around quite a lot. And sadly, as Dale's saying, in the bigger organisations, culture is not taking a team of people and sticking them in the corner with a ping pong table. It's got to go, you know, a good way through the whole organisation. Adam and I know someone who works for got a similar role to Adam, who works for a big multinational corporation, who behind closed doors will tell you about the 3 digital agencies that they've bankrupted because of their procurement processes. Nothing malicious about it, it just kept happening to them. And eventually they, you know, sat down and tried to figure out what they were doing that was killing these otherwise perfectly, you know, sort of good, healthy, you know, small digital agencies. And it came down to really having to take an essence of that culture that Dale has talked about and, you know, pushing it into other parts of the organisation where you don't necessarily think it's going to happen. Ian's point about selling to, as a startup, selling to big companies, absolutely right, but you just got to watch out for these little nuances that a big company thinks it's sorted out because it's got a culture change going on.
I was just going to say something. One of my first roles when I transitioned from agency into Westpac was, I don't know what the hell I'd call it, keeping the agencies alive, I guess. So we had a roster of about active about 40 agencies that we dealt with. And being the brand that it is, it's generally a carrot that gets dangled in front of an agency. You know, if you just do this for 50% of your normal clip of the ticket, you may get a sniff at westpac.com.au. And so part of what my role originally was that getting the agencies to understand actually how the corporate life works and who actually has access to funding and what did it actually mean that you're not going to reinvent westpac.com.au because it just got 12 months ago, so it's not going to happen for another 2 cycles at least. So don't bet your agency on the fact that you're going to land westpac.com.au, no matter how good that how good the experience is going currently within that particular team that you're working with in the bank. The other part as well with the startups working with large corporate is any sales is relationship based. So you've got to be cognizant of the fact that that relationship can move, in the sense of that person that you're tied to, that you're the number one fan of and they're the number one fan of you, they may actually leave Westpac and go to CBA. Great, that's awesome. Now you've got your foothold in two banks, but you've also got to realize that your peer that you were sort of building your house on has sort of moved as well. So there's some realities as well that the startups need to be aware of, that the corporates aren't intentionally and maliciously, as John said, trying to bankrupt you. It's just there's literally politics that occur at all levels, even in startups, but that are less aware of what's happening outside of the bank itself.
Excellent. A couple of things that both Mark and Dale talked about takes me to the next topic, which is a little bit around risk-taking. So you commented on sort of disruption. On one side, is that actually forcing enterprises to be a little bit more risk-accepting, because perhaps there's big risk in not being innovative? And equally, on the other side, perhaps, is there risk understanding within startups? So, I mean, where do they see risk from that point of view? So, Mark, maybe we can sort of explore that angle a little bit. In contrast, innovation, how do these organisations perceive risk and manage risk?
Yeah, if we consider that kind of spectrum that I was hinting at before, the incremental side and then the disruptive side, it's quite interesting, because when we talk to big business about innovating, and particularly when we're trying to coax them towards the disruptive side and working with startups, one question always comes up from the CIO or someone that always ends up with this question, which is, well, what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? Which is kind of like sniffing out the candle of any particular kind of innovation that might be lighting up at the time. It's the whole point about disruptive innovation is that you can easily quantify and say, well, if you put this much in, we're going to get this much out. That kind of question is far more suited to the incremental sort of innovation that people have always done, and that's why CIOs typically ask it, because that's how they make a lot of their judgments and assessments. So this cultural change needs to first off happen in that executive team, which is actually what are the more significant questions I should be asking, and one of those might be, well, what's the cost to us if we miss this opportunity? What's the cost of a lost opportunity? So as people are shifting their culture, that's a question we keep coming back to. There's an opportunity here. What if a major disruption happens in your industry? The sort of things we've seen with Uber in the taxi industry and Airbnb in the hotel industry. Well, try to imagine what sorts of disruptions could take place and what would be the cost and the impact on that. And then you start being able to come up with some quantifiable figures potentially that you can start thinking, well, perhaps then we need to be innovating in this space and not just doing it the way we've always done it, but let's work with a range of startups in that space and see what sort of things are emerging.
Can I make a point on that?
Sure.
It's not just about it being innovative. I mean, Kodak invented the digital camera, and they didn't execute on it, so they got rolled. So you're getting a lot of companies that innovate, but the true innovators, in my view, are the ones that are prepared to, are you prepared to build the knife that will cut your throat? So I'd say with, plaudits to Westpac in this one, but your Reinventure fund that you fully own, the first investment that Reinventure made, so Reinventure is a $50 million venture fund owned by Westpac entirely, two great guys running it, really smart VCs. First investment they made was in Society One. So Society One is a peer-to-peer lender. If that works and takes off, then that's going to, I don't think it'll necessarily be a mortal blow, but it's a gradual eking away of one of Westpac's key revenue or profit drivers, their lending business. So they were prepared to do that. And there's other companies out there now prepared to do it. So even, maybe Telstra and Muradi is not the great example, but investing in companies that could potentially cut your own throat. So if you're going to get, stabbed in the alley and your wallet stolen, then you might as well know the person that's doing it.
I think from my perspective, thinking about the appetite for risk, we sort of touched on it a bit before. In a corporate scenario, there are so many questions to answer and so many stratification of, the board down to the people who are having to actually execute decisions, that what you wind up with is a real disconnect of, the types of questions that get asked by a good and serious board about what are we doing to ensure that our business is viable into the future and we're facing and meeting these challenges and that strategically we're positioned well, to the sorts of decisions, and Adam, you said it perfectly, every project you invest in that doesn't work out for any reason, you carry that forward to the next one, and it just becomes this almost legacy of failure, which rather than being seen as an investment is seen as a cost. Mm-hmm. And so at the startup level, there's a greater appetite for risk because A, there isn't a big business already there to protect, but also because that there's a compression of the shareholders to the executors, whereas in a larger enterprise, the distinction between the shareholder who's expecting dividends in their bank account and them to be franked, through to the guy who's actually saying, well, should I do this project or that project, the ROI discussion becomes much more meaningful, and the incrementalism becomes much more a driving factor in that discussion, I think.
Anyone else want to comment on?
I've just got one more addition, which is slightly more simplistic than Dale's, but along the same sort of lines. From within the digital industry, we've never really sort of focused on the concept of security, cybersecurity, IT security. There's been a sort of tendency just to get on with things, and it'll tend to work its way out. Completely different on the boards of an ASX 200 company, for a very, very simple reason. If one of us stuffs up at a low level, we might lose our job, but we don't automatically necessarily lose our house. Now, if you're a director on a company and something big goes down like Sony PlayStation, you think Sony PlayStation would be a company that would know something about all this, and you're a manufacturing company out in the suburbs, turn over 500 million a year, nice solid business, you're a director, you're legally liable for whatever happens to that organisation. So it adds another layer of risk aversiveness at the very, very, very top, which can be quite hard to change around. And again, that comes from where do you get in to try and change the culture around. But just thinking about the motivators and the inhibitors to the way people behave at these big companies. They all get it now. Even Jerry Harvey knows that this internet thing's here to stay. So they all absolutely get it, but it's just trying to get past some of those barriers that don't involve losing your house.
John, I think they get it from a perception basis, but most of us here and in this room, I mean, we've done startups, like, they are so incredibly and vastly risky. I mean, 70% of tech startups will fail. So why would you ever go and start something that you could lose your house, your reputation, your money, your marriage, everything, for a 70% chance of losing it? So if it was easy, everyone here would be rich.
Exactly.
And it'd be very boring. It's not. So, and I think a lot of corporates talk about risk in that way, but until you've actually got people around, and that's part of the reason, the thing I liked about Murray is it's not about getting the staff through, it's about, you come to the demo night, the entire board is there. They're the ones that are learning and trying to understand what risk and investment and that appetite means. So I think we just need a rebalancing of what, when we talk to risk to corporates, there's risk in terms of, you might get wrapped in the knuckles and lose your job, and there's risk, you're going to lose your company.
Yep.